I am worried about the rise of the far right. I mean, we can see what's happening in Germany with the recent elections, see what's happening in France and other countries. And I'm worried about the far right.
Well, at the TUC, their conference speakers are spreading blatant lies about Farage.
Nigel Farage isn't a friend of the working class. He's a fraud. A public school educated, private equity loving, NHS privatising, Putin apologist fraud.
How despicable. In my digest next, I'll argue that Labour should be paranoid about the political revolution that is coming. Then my brilliant superstar panel, Russell Quirk and Nick Buckley, weigh in. Mark my words, Tier Kier Starmer will be the most unpopular and unsuccessful post-war British Prime Minister. Despite his massive majority, he has absolutely no chance of lasting for 5 years in Downing Street. It's impossible, let me tell you, because this arrogant, lying charlatan and chameleon is at war with his own people. He thinks he's keeping a lid on it by jailing white working class folk for so-called rioting or fruity social media posts for disproportionately long periods. But long. Because we know we're not far right. No matter how many times he implies being deeply concerned about mass unrestrained immigration for decades and an illegal invasion of our southern border via the Channel makes us so. There was more of his usual bullshit this weekend.
Do you think that leaders in this country, perhaps also if you look at what we've seen in Germany, also look at what's happened in France, do you think that leaders have been complacent about the rise of the far right?
I am worried about the rise of the far right. I mean, we can see what's happening in Germany with the recent elections, see what's happening in France and other countries. And I'm worried about the far right because it's the sort of snake oil of the easy answer. I'm convinced that the answer to it is delivery in government. So the best argument against the far right, the best argument against the easy answer is to deliver, to bring about the change that we promised we'd bring about. And that change was to improve living standards so people are better off, to make sure we got properly functioning public services, particularly the NHS, and to deal with issues like immigration and crime and sewage. We have to deliver on that. And that's why I'm utterly focused on ensuring we can bring about that change in the period that we've got in government.
Who is this far right he speaks of? What is this snake oil? Let me tell you, that line is not going to hold. As Peter Lloyd posted on X, the far right aren't stabbing kids. The far right don't roam the streets with machetes. The far right aren't 90% of MI5's watch list. The far right don't blow up trains and pop concerts. The far right aren't grooming white girls. The far right doesn't really exist. Chris Rose added, Keir Starmer told the BBC he's worried about the rise of the far right. No mention of Islamist terrorism, which accounts for approximately 67% of attacks since 2018, about 3/4 of the MI5 caseload, the sectarian MPs who ran dirty campaigns against Labour MPs. And Chris Davies continued, since 2005, 95 people have been murdered by Muslim extremists. 3 people have been murdered by the quote-unquote far right. Over 90% of people on the security forces terror watch list are Muslims. Over 75% of their caseload are Muslims. But the far right is the problem? Indeed, it was only after Laura Kuenssberg, in full British bashing corporation mode, tried to get Starmer to condemn the so-called rioters as racist that slippery Starmer finally mentioned the word immigration before immediately shutting the discussion down again. Watch this extraordinary exchange.
Do you think the rioters were racists?
I think a far right. I think there was racism there. I think it featured differently across the country. I went over to Belfast, for example, to talk to the police service of Northern Ireland, who had petrol bombs thrown at them. Racism, far right. But it was totally illegitimate. It is not acceptable in any society. And yes, I accept that, across the country, people have strong views about things like immigration. I accept that, but I'm not prepared to tolerate that sort of disorder under any circumstances, nor will I change government policy one bit as a result of that sort of violence.
Do you think we're a racist country?
I don't think we're a racist country. I think we're a country of decent people, tolerant people. The real Britain was the people who came out the day after in Southport. It was incredible. People came out with their trowels, with their brooms, they cleaned up, they rebuilt. They're the real face of Britain. And that's the Britain that I think is essential to reuniting and bringing this country back together.
The takeaway from that could not be any more clear, could it? Caring about immigration, according to both the national broadcaster and the national government, makes you racist. So we're not even going to have the discussion with you plebs. No wonder Nigel Farage is thinking seriously about becoming Prime Minister in 2029, as I have predicted he will. Biggest party.
Yes.
Do you have ambitions to be Prime Minister?
I have ambitions for reform to be the biggest party at the next general election.
But you